To have you with us here on this Wednesday night, and we begin tonight with the breaking news coming in from Ukraine. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine now 7 days in, there are late reports tonight that one of the first large cities in Ukraine to fall to the Russians, the city of Kherson in the south, civilians at greater and greater risk now. The Ukrainians say more than 2,000 have already died. But the people there are putting up an unexpected fight, battling to keep their cities. Kyiv holding so far that 40-mile-long convoy of Russian vehicles, about 17 miles out now. And this evening, the alarming nuclear threat. Russian forces battling for control. And this evening, the alarming nuclear threat. Russian forces battling for control of Ukraine's nuclear power plants. Hundreds of Ukrainians blocking them at one plant tonight. The images of war here, an explosion near a civilian brewery today in eastern Ukraine, seen in videos circulating on social media. In the hard-hit city of Kharkiv, that's the second largest city, missiles targeting government buildings and a university today. And this neighborhood, about 90 miles northwest of Kyiv, the target of an attack. You can see it's been turned to rubble. In Kyiv and other cities, families seeking shelter in the subway and in basements underground, and when they venture out, waiting in long lines at grocery stores. And the harrowing scene in hospitals, wards moved underground. This maternity hospital converted to a medical ward to treat the civilians injured in the Russian shelling. And yet, in images circulating on social media tonight, those Ukrainians standing up wherever they can, including that scene at the road to the country's largest nuclear power plant to keep the Russians out. President Biden overnight at the State of the Union telling the nation and the world that freedom will always triumph over tyranny, and warned Vladimir Putin that he has no idea what's coming. And tonight here, what Ian Pannell and our team discovered at a children's hospital in Kyiv. Young patients hiding underground for their own safety. Ian Pannell leading us off again tonight from Kyiv.
Tonight, Russia intensifying its invasion, increasingly hitting civilian as well as military targets, striking an ammunition dump outside Kharkiv, seen in images posted on social media. And a battle now raging for control of the country's second largest city. Once again, Russia hitting civilian sites, striking the city's university. Over 2,000 people have been killed throughout the country since the Russian invasion began a week ago, according to Ukrainian officials.
These aren't military targets. This is where civilians work and families live. This is shameful.
And Russia revealing its losses for the first time. Tonight saying at least 498 of its soldiers have died and nearly 1,600 have been injured. Ukrainian officials say the real number is much higher. Western intelligence sources say Russia appears to have surrounded 5 major Ukrainian cities, including Kharkiv. There are multiple reports that the Russians have taken Kherson in the south, which, if confirmed, will be the largest Ukrainian city to fall. But the Pentagon today saying that the massive Russian convoy bearing down on Kyiv appears to have ground to a halt about 70 miles north of the capital.
The northern push by the Russians down towards the south, towards Kyiv, remains stalled.
Pentagon officials say they believe stiff Ukrainian resistance, including attacks on advancing Russian columns, have combined with shortages of food and fuel to halt the convoy, at least for the time being. Meanwhile, Ukraine's sending a delegation to meet with the Russians today for a second round of talks. But hopes of a breakthrough are low. And on the ground, Ukrainian defiance of the Russian occupation is growing. Videos circulating online show hundreds of people blocking the road to the country's largest nuclear facility located in the south. Plant officials denied claims by Russia that its troops now control the facility. But the Russians do control Chernobyl, and the UN's nuclear watchdog groups are raising the alarm that for the first time, nuclear facilities are caught in the middle of a modern military conflict. Across the country, Russian forces caught in the crossfire. President Biden today saying they're monitoring Russian tactics for possible war crimes.
Intentionally targeting civilian areas. There are over 2,000 civilians. There they are.
In the State of the Union speech last night, Biden welcomed the Ukrainian ambassador and praised her country's heroism.
Ukrainian ambassador of the United States is here tonight, sitting with the First Lady. Let each of us, if you're able to stand and send an unmistakable signal to the world of Ukraine. Thank you.
Biden vowing to keep up the economic and political pressure on Putin.
He has no idea what's coming.
At the UN today, the General Assembly condemning Russia's invasion in an historic 141-5 vote. Russia isolated, with even allies like Cuba and Iran abstaining. UN officials now say the fighting's forced more than 1 million refugees from the country and predict many more are likely to leave as the Russian onslaught continues. The Kremlin claims it'll allow citizens to flee besieged cities, including Kyiv. But here in the capital, there are many who have no choice but to stay. This is the biggest children's hospital in Ukraine, where medics and staff now risk their own lives to care for more than 190 desperately sick kids here. We're inside the main children's hospital, not just for Kiev, but for the entire country. And the reason we're heading down this passage and underground is because that's where the patients, the children, some of whom are on chemotherapy, have been moved for their own safety. Since the war began, many of them are now on gurneys, hiding underground in the basement, like little Yarek, who has fluid on his brain. And Ilya, whose dad cares for her, while his wife and other kids are hiding near the front lines.
It must be harder down here.
Valentin says, of course it's harder down here, but what can we do? We won't give up though. We'll fight to the last. And it's not just the sick, but the wounded here too. 13-year-old Vova was badly injured when the family car came under attack. His father and cousin were killed, and he now fights for his life in intensive care. His mother agreed to let us film because so many here want the world to see what has become of their children.
My emotion, I believe in victory. I believe in maybe in future, tomorrow, maybe next week or next month, I see some in our clinic.
An extraordinary scene unfolding for these families and these youngest of patients already going through what they're going through with their health and now having to hide in the basements just to protect themselves from what's playing out in their country. Ian, I know a lot of people here in this country are going to wonder how these children will survive this if the Russians take over, or will they be protected? And we're also learning about breaking news tonight, reports that a major Ukrainian city may have just fallen in the south. This would be the first large city to fall to the Russians?
Yeah, that's right, David. I mean, the situation in the hospital is heartbreaking. I mean, some of the babies who needed bone marrow transplants have been taken successfully across the border into Poland. And as I'm talking to you, you can hear what's happening in the city. Here in Kiev, some of the other children, of course, are listening to that sound of the bombardment. They're hiding in the basement. They're fearful that the war's coming to us. As for Kherson, that's potentially a sound that the war is closing in on many cities in the country. The Russian advance may have been slowed, but it hasn't been stopped. David?
And as they brace there in Kyiv as well, Ian, you reported there the UN voting 141-5 to condemn Russia's invasion. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be curious who voted against condemning the Russians.
Yeah, pretty overwhelming condemnation of Russia. There were even some traditional allies abstaining along with India and China, but it's a fairly motley crew of nations who stood side to side with Russia. Just 4 countries: Syria, North Korea, Belarus and Eritrea, most of them, as Russia is now becoming, pariah nations. David?
All right, Ian Powell leading off our coverage. Ian, please, you and the team stay safe tonight in Kyiv. And tonight the UN is now reporting 1 million refugees have now left Ukraine, fleeing to save their families, their children, not knowing if they'll ever come back, wondering when they'll see their fathers again. And tonight here also the stories of those who have chosen to stay behind, what they're now doing, what they're now making to arm and protect family members turned fighters. Matt Gutman in Lviv tonight.
Tonight they keep coming. On foot, on buses and trains. They keep coming. On foot, on buses and trains. Infants being carried across, the elderly wheeled through those borders. Over 1 million people have fled Ukraine in just 7 days, neighboring countries welcoming them in. From shelter in Poland to a warm drink and a hug in Moldova. And in Slovakia, a chance to watch cartoons. All small comforts to ease the exile. In Romania, for one woman, the thought of all she's left behind, too much to bear.
My husband, my home, my dog, my cats, my life.
Here in Lviv, on this packed bus bound for Poland, we asked how many are worried about their husbands at home. Almost every one of those hands went up. Ukraine, a nation of more than 43 million, almost everyone that has stayed mobilized for war. At a machine shop here in Lviv, the sizzle of welding, the grinding of steel, sounds of the war effort.
We have a guy from IT, an economist, and a mechanical engineer.
Yeah.
And now you're making steel traps for Russian tanks.
Yeah. To stop them.
That hedge of barricades and these spikes, they're weapons of defense. This frigid yard, their foxhole. Sviatoslav has signed up to fight, but he's still waiting for a gun.
Are you afraid?
Yeah, but it doesn't matter.
His wife and 3-year-old daughter are safe in Poland. He told his little girl she was going on vacation.
She's talking to me, Daddy, come to me, please. And
I'm crying.
everything will be okay.
And across town tonight, an art gallery turned into a military workshop. The thrum of hundreds of young people, mostly women, ripping fabric, cutting strips, and those fast fingers threading camo nets.
We are creating nets to hide our military forces from snipers and different Russian forces.
Some big enough to cover tanks, others the size of a throw blanket. Before the war, Bogdana was a college instructor. Now she oversees this workshop. Bogdana as courageous as any soldier.
You will stand in front of the tanks with your...
More than 1 million refugees, and of course, you're also reporting here on those who have chosen to stay. You've heard from so many of them.
David, they're telling us that their greatest weapon right now is their unity. And this is a nation that is now fully mobilized to fend off that Russian invasion. Every resource, every person devoted to fighting them off. David.
It's been extraordinary to witness, Matt. Thank you. Tonight, the U.S. is moving to tighten the squeeze on Vladimir Putin and the oligarchs, the richest Russians who surround him, closing American airspace to Russian planes, imposing new sanctions on oil and gas interests, and moving to seize oligarchs' assets in the U.S. In fact, the Secretary of State today warning that they could freeze and seize yachts, private jets, and their estates. Could these oligarchs be a way of finally getting to Putin to influence his decisions moving forward? James Longman from Moscow again tonight.
Tonight, the economic pressure on Vladimir Putin and his inner circle intensifying. Russia's push into Ukraine hitting the 1-week mark. The US now threatening to seize the assets of any Russian oligarch, wealthy businessman with ties to the Kremlin, that violates its sanctions.
We will freeze and seize their yachts, their private jets, their opulent estates in world capitals.
The US not releasing new names yet, but this week the EU sanctioning 26 individuals and 1 company. Among them, the CEO of the state oil company Rosneft, another man known as Putin's wallet, and the insurance company Sogaz, partially owned by a close Putin ally. Some Russian oligarchs are calling those sanctions unfair. Others now publicly calling for an end to Putin's war.
The strategy is to make their lives, which